Welcome to today's webinar on looking at Asian Americans and how we're fighting this double risk with both COVID-19 and also the increasing rates of both hate crimes and racism that's wrongly blaming the AAPI community for this. But I wanted to just let our public know about the Brookline Asian American Family Network, which is in Brookline and one of the co-sponsors of this program. So BAFN, the Brookline Asian American Family Network, was formed to support the needs of Asian American students and their families. And it grew out of wanting to support them within the public school system. It began in 2009 when there was a realization that AAPI representation was no longer on our school committee. And though that has changed and ebbed and flowed over time, there still remains little AAPI representation within our town administration and our elected officials as well. And then in particular amongst our school staff and faculty, which is a concern for families because Asian Americans comprise nearly 20% of the population within our schools and is the largest community of color within Brookline as well. So we're here and happy to help support our communities as best we can. And we have a BAFN listserv that you can join. We also have a Facebook page that you can also join and get information. We have a steering committee. Ms. Chi Wu, who is also on this webinar, is our chair of the steering committee and of BAFN. And we hold a number of events throughout the year. We've held events meeting with our school superintendent. We've meeting with other elected officials through town. We hold an essay contest looking at what does it mean to be Asian American in Brookline. And we'll be announcing winners for that contest soon, with May being Asian American Pacific Heritage Islander Month. And we also help to organize the Lunar New Year celebration with our town as well. Most recently, we've done some outreach to provide support for our AAPI restaurants in town that had suffered, at the beginning of this pandemic, and then as well continuing on in all of our restaurants and businesses in Brookline. So we hope that once we're not physically distancing, people will also consider going back to visit our AAPI restaurants as well. So again, the Brookline Asian American Family Network is here, and we work to advocate and help our AAPI families within town. So please feel free to reach out. Thank you. And then next, I wanted to turn it over to our select board member, Raul Fernandez, who will then also introduce Professor Andrew Leung, who is a associate professor in the philosophy department in the College of Liberal Arts at UMass Boston, where he teaches legal studies, Latino and Asian American studies as well. So, select board member Fernandez.
Chris, thanks so much. Thanks for partnering with us to make this happen. To Chichi, to Andrew, to Caitlin, State Representative Vitolo for being with us. Select Board Member Heather Hamilton is on, and I know Select Board Member Nancy Heller is on as well. I see her in the attendee list, and I think other board members are joining us too. Just wanted to say, we've seen this rise in racist and xenophobic activities, actions, words, slurs around the country, and even today, as we prepare to do this live, people attempting to get into this this feed, and fortunately, we've got the protections to stop them from doing that kind of thing. It's sad to see, but it's also important for us to stand together in opposition to this kind of behavior. Folks from the Asian American Family Network, the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, and individual residents asked the Select Board to issue a statement on this, and rightfully so. And we did this past Tuesday. And so I want to read that statement to you, and then also to talk about some other efforts that we've got going on here. So the statement first, Select Board statement on supporting our Asian community. Many residents have asked the Select Board to respond to the recent racist and xenophobic acts directed at the Asian community in Brookline and beyond. These bigoted acts driven by fear and ignorance have been well chronicled in the news media and firsthand reports from our own community members. While the spread of COVID-19 may be the excuse given for this abhorrent behavior, We know well that racism and xenophobia toward the Asian community has existed long before this crisis. We also know that the stigma has been historically reinforced by government actions like passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the internment of Japanese American citizens during World War II, and the forced placement of Asian children into segregated schools. It's because racism and xenophobia toward Asians has such deep roots that we must be even more vigilant in calling it out, alongside anti-Semitism, homophobia, and other forms of hate. While each member of our board has spoken out individually about this, we want to be clear that we stand united in denouncing these racist and xenophobic acts, as well as the many individual and governmental acts perpetrated against Asians throughout our country's history. We'd like to thank Brookline's Asian American Family Network and our Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations for their advocacy on this issue. COVID-19 is a threat to everyone. Our ability to get through this crisis depends on all of us in Brookline working together. We hope you'll join us in actively speaking out against any racist or xenophobic comments you may hear and supporting our Asian community, particularly our small businesses, in every way that you can. So that's the statement there. What I want to add to that as well is another announcement we made on Tuesday is the town getting behind the Brookline Community Foundation Safety Net Fund, which is expertly administered by the Brookline Center. This fund is really important, especially for folks who are the most vulnerable in our community. The Safety Net Fund has existed for 20 years, so this is not a brand new fund that's been created. However, it has really been activated while we're in the midst of this COVID-19 public health pandemic, and many more folks have been asking for support there. So the town has committed $175,000 to that fund, and we're encouraging everybody and anyone that is able to give to that fund. And I just want to briefly just say, here's what it is and what it does. This fund provides funding for rent, utilities, food, and other essentials up to $1,000 per person right now. As you can imagine, the need is great, and we're going to need to make sure there's enough of the funds to go around. And it takes a whole community approach, which means in addition to residents of Brookline, it's also available to anyone who lives, works, or studies in Brookline. That includes small business owners in Brookline. That includes employees in Brookline, especially from our small businesses. That includes METCO families who study in Brookline, and it's all regardless of documentation status. You don't need to prove citizenship or residency or anything like that. So I just want to impress upon people to help to spread the word about this fund. You can go to either the Brookline Center or Brookline Community Foundation website for more information about that. And I just really encourage anyone who's able to support this fund as well financially. The town's putting what it can behind it. I hope we're able to put more in the future because the need is great and it's long lasting. So I just wanted to share those few updates, and I look forward to hearing from Andrew, and I'll stick around and be here if there's any questions that I can help answer as well. So thanks so much, Chris, Chi-Chi, Caitlin, Tommy, Heather, others, and Andrew. I think you're on.
All right. I'm going to switch to my share screen. Okay, just want to confirm everybody can see the PowerPoint? Yes, great.
Yes.
So the PowerPoint entitled Love, Death, and Hate in the Age of COVID-19, Responding to Anti-Asian Violence and Hatred. Just to repeat real quick, we all know this. The function of scapegoating is to diffuse and deflect criticism and blame that's going to you onto somebody else. With the very different structural inequality that's in place already, it's very easy to have our Black, brown, white folks commit hate, intolerance upon our Asian population. And here it's reinforced by our government and institutions. When President Trump usage of Chinese virus, or the Secretary of State Pompeo calling it the Wuhan virus, or Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's Chinese coronavirus, and even a White House staffer saying Kung flu to an Asian American reporter. These are all happening despite the WHO directive to say we ought not to have geographic designation when it comes to viruses, because it doesn't help with the cure, and in fact, it does more harm than good. The impact of COVID-19 obviously impacts everyone, regardless of our social differences. We collectively knew in our country that there was hatred going on against the Asian American community, even since January. And a couple weeks ago, 3 organizations gathered together and started to launch this group called Stop AAPI Hate. AAPI standing for Asian American Pacific Islander. So they have an online reporting center that started on March 19th. And within the first week, they had 673 reports. And by now, there's more than 1,000 reports into the center. The incidents range from verbal harassment, shunning, to physical assaults. And the trends that we see coming out of the online report, and they're only one of few that are actually doing it nationally. The trends are interesting because we roughly see around 100 incidents being reported on a daily basis. About 5% being filed by limited English speakers. Women are 3 times more likely to report incidents. And this is the more important part right here. Asian Americans of different ethnicities are being racially profiled because 61% of the respondents are non-Asian, non-Chinese. So these verbal harassment, name calling make up for roughly about 2/3 of all of the reports. And on an international basis, not just within the United States, things have gotten so bad for the Chinese that there's actually a Wikipedia page entitled List of Incidents of Xenophobia and Racism Related to the Corona Pandemic, which go about listing all of the incidents documented so far across the globe. So for Asians in the United States and beyond, if the virus doesn't kill us first, racism might. The major key takeaways from this presentation should be, number one, that it's not simply about an anti-Chinese, but it is about an anti-Asian hostility and violence. Since hate has no rationale and there's no accurate identification of its victims. We see this in a case study of what I call the lumping effect, or you're all the same. In the case study of the 1982 murder, the killing of Vincent Chin, where his killers, 2 unemployed auto workers in Detroit, essentially blamed Vincent for the recession of the auto industry in Detroit at the time, saying that he's Japanese, and killed him with a baseball bat. And his killers got away with only a $3,000 fine and never served 1 day in jail. The second key takeaway is that hate is really randomized. It can happen anywhere and any place. And now, due to the kind of social distancing and stay-at-home advisories, we see mainly incidents of hate happening in mass transit, at the grocery store, at the pharmacy, and other public spaces. Point number 3, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, 95% of hate incidents are conducted by individuals and not by organized groups. So it's really a situation where hate groups encourage young perpetrators to commit to the hate and the violence. Point number 4, non-Asians here have the power to do something positive in any particular hate incident as bystander, or what we call upstander, and allies. Point number 5, the United States is built on hate, really. It's about anti-Black, anti-Native, anti-Asian, anti-Latinx, anti-immigrant, and shows the various different structural inequality that we see is the major hurdle for us to address in hate. So one of the interesting things, that we see in an article today coming out from the New York Times entitled "Farm Workers, Mostly Undocumented, Become quote unquote essential during the pandemic." So now immigrant field workers have been told to keep working because they are essential workers in providing the necessary groceries that that keeps us surviving. So anti-Chinese efforts, anti-Chinese violence, riots, massacre is really nothing new. This particular slide shows you all just a very, very quick time period in the late 19th century of all of the various different massacres, riots that were happening throughout the West, and culminated in 1882 with the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And just to look at one particular episode in a little bit more detail, this is a picture of the Rock Springs Massacre in 1885. And here on this particular slide, you have documentation and investigation by the Chinese Council in 1885 of the 28 people, the identity and how they were mutilated, how they were burnt. And these are human beings with families, family members, children. So the cycle of hate here really for Asian Americans, at a period ago in the 1980s with the height of the economic recession and a little bit of the 1990s, that's when we were front and center on that mantle of hate until we were overtaken as scapegoat number one by the Muslims following 9/11. And now, more currently, we have migrants and unaccompanied minor immigrants taking over that particular mantle as the build the wall erupted. And now, with the virus, what we see is actually a trend back to the Chinese and essentially Asians now as the number one scapegoat. Here, now we get into the distinction between hate crime versus a bias incident. A hate crime is essentially a crime, but it is motivated in whole or in part by bias. So it's what we call an enhancer. So that is both a hate crime, but it is crime, but based on bias itself. Whereas a bias incident is conduct, speech, or expression that does not rise to a level of criminal act, but in fact is motivated by some form of prejudice or bias. The next slide is important for us to note because this is what we call hate crime indicators. During World War II and after World War II, many, many decades after World War II, the outcries still remain. Never forget Pearl Harbor. And so the various different hate crime indicators that were associated with incidents were if the victims were labeled as Japanese, or don't forget Pearl Harbor, or that the incident happened on December 7th. So with that particular generation dying off, we are now seeing anti-Asian hate crime sourcing less to that particular history of World War II and the Pearl Harbor bombing, and hate now motivated being onto new reasons. So these particular hate crime indicators are important for us to understand so that we can understand that it's not just a crime, but is actually motivated by hate. Currently, the examples that we see in the incitement of hate include the following. You brought the virus onto us, which indicates that it's the fault of any of the Asians walking around, okay? Or you diseased, BITCH, or what we hear very, very popular before the schools shut down, kids of Asian descent being blamed. Hey, Corona, or the ever popular go back to where you came from. And in this particular case, go back to China. And so the blaming continues. It's because of you that I lost my loved ones. It's because of you that I lost my job, my business. So these are the kind of statements and incitements that we see that we understand to be hate crime indicators. The types of crimes that have been documented thus far include bullets shot through a window of a home of an Asian, verbal assaults and other forms of interrogation about where are you from. And we actually saw this coming out of a particular incident in the Mideast where a Hmong family was trying to rent from two various different motel rooms on the same day, where the managers asked them, where are you from? We can't rent to you if you're from China. And another type of hate that we see of late is coughing intentionally from the perpetrator onto their Asian victims. We also see spitting and other forms of physical assaults. We see Asian businesses being vandalized, and to date, the most serious incident of hate that we see, I'm sure some of you guys heard about it, is at the Sam's Club in Texas, where 4 people were stabbed, and 2 out of the 4 were children, ages 2 and 6. So what do we do if you are actually the victim? Well, this is coming from the Southern Poverty Law Center, these slides here, the contents of this slide. What we want to do is to make sure that we report every single incident. Even if you, the victim, are afraid to go to the police, you should still publicize and file that report with non-police organizations such as community-based organizations, various different civil rights organizations, or the various different websites that's collecting this data. And so what you want to do as a victim is to be able to, once you get home to a safe place, write down, document as much of the details as much as you can, because otherwise you're going to forget it. Thereafter, contact people in the know, talk to a civil rights support group or a person for resources, for advice. Next point is that if you feel comfortable enough, talk to the press about it so that the public will understand that there is another epidemic that's going on, the virus of hate. Research what your legal rights are. Again, talk to various different people in the know. The last point I added, when things simmer down, because this type of hate and this sourcing of hate to COVID-19 will be with us for many, many different decades to come. But once you feel safe enough and once you feel comfortable enough to do so, if this type of hate happens within the confines of the office, within the confines of extended family members, what you need to do is to speak up, confront the harasser, because it is a safe space, and call it out for exactly what it is, to say that's racist. The next slide is about what allies and bystanders can actually do. Make your presence known to the witness through eye contact. If you're safe enough to, if you feel safe enough to do so, move physically closer to the person. Yes, I understand, we're still in the era of social distancing, but even that little physical movement towards the victim will signal some sense of support to the perpetrator. The next thing is to make sure that, if you feel safe enough to actually film, to record the incident. This next point is to take your cues, your directions from the individual being harassed. So for instance, if the person being harassed is actually resisting in their own way, simply then just stand by and check in with them afterwards. Would you like me to walk with you somewhere else that's safe? Should we go to the next car? Things like that. But the next point is to make sure that both of you, as the bystander and the victim, the person being harassed, is actually in a safe space. You should assess your surroundings. Are there people nearby that you can actually pull in to support you? Is the perpetrator much larger than you, thus your inability to defend yourself? Does the perpetrator seem to be intoxicated or mentally unstable? Is there an escape route for you? The next slide is what not to do, and this is coming from the American Friends Service Committee. Don't call the police immediately. Check in with the victim. The exception here is that if there is actually some sort of a violence, some sort of assault that's going on where you can't deal with and address the violence immediately, and that's where you would need to call the police immediately. The reason why we don't want to immediately call the police is that for many particular communities, they may be experiencing harassment, and sometimes the police may actually do more harm than good. Point number 2, don't escalate the situation. It's not about you as the bystander getting into a fight and defending the victim. The last point, I know it's a double negative, don't do nothing. This means that don't just sit by. Silence is just as dangerous, because what it does, being silent and sitting there, not doing anything, communicates your approval to the perpetrator. In fact, you embolden the perpetrator to continue, and it simply leaves the victim high and dry. What can institutions do? Well, for Brookline, we have a dedicated person within Brookline Police Department. We have town hall, we have health department, we have DICR that would be in the position to help people to file complaints. Caitlin will talk a little bit more about this later. We could meet with the school committee to see whether we can actually update and enhance the existing anti-bullying curriculum to make sure that anti-Asian hate is actually covered. We may have joint meetings amongst our faith group leaders, community groups, housing association to make sure that this is put onto their watch list. We could have PSAs, such as when you see something racist, say that's racist. Or have meetings with the Attorney General's office or the DA just to make sure that they understand this is this should be on their radar. This next slide is coming from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. These are institutionally, again, things that we could all do. Number 1, how we should increase community and law enforcement collaborations. Number 2, we need to enhance existing training and education about hate crimes for our law enforcement and prosecutors. So for instance, we should probably have mandatory police training, annual trainings on hate crime training. And make sure that this is actually an issue that's identified and is a pressing issue for other groups within the state, like the Municipal Police Training Committee. Number 3, we need to strengthen data collection, reporting, and analysis. A lot of various different victims have language access issues. And so that's one of the problems as to why we don't see the data being increased, because they don't speak English to actually even do the reporting itself. And not only that, but even assuming we are in position to file reports, first of all, 5 to 10 cases of racist violence go unreported. So for every report that actually is reported, in 2015, the bottom of this slide shows you the kind of disparities, the problems that we have institutionally. Just within the Department of Justice itself in 2015, the Uniform Crime Report only reported for that year 5,818 single bias incidents, whereas a different group within DOJ, the National Crime Victimization Survey, estimated there were 250,000 hate crimes. So that alone tells you the kind of institutional problems that we have in documenting hate crime. A 4th point, we need to improve hate crime incident and crime management from the police, because all across the country, most of the time, a lot of police departments are dismissive of civil rights violations, and which means that they don't go about properly investigating the same. So we need to, again, make sure that police departments all over understand the pressing issue with respect to anti-Asian bias. And the last one is about the role of prosecutors. If we actually have sensitive district attorneys and attorney generals, this will actually help with the problem, because then we have victims that will actually come forward. The case example that we would see is, in fact, in Suffolk County with DA Rollins in the hate crime that we saw that was happening in East Boston at the end of February, where 2 Spanish-speaking female were assaulted physically, saying, from the perpetrator saying, you know, this is America, don't speak Spanish, speak English. And so with the physical assault accompanying it, DA Rollins upped it to actually a hate crime charge. So as we see this COVID-19 happening onto us collectively, for the Asian American community, all of us, we hope that, you know, we would come up with a vaccine in the near future to be able to immunize us from this pandemic. But there is no vaccine that's available for us for the virus of racism, which becomes a source of hatred for generations to come. And what we need to really remember is that all of us are human. We need to love instead of hate, and we need to unify and not divide. Thank you. Back to you all.
Thank you, Professor Liang, for your very insightful presentation and the tips you gave on how to handle anti-Asian hate incidents, both as the victim and as an ally. Really appreciate that. So we are going to have a moderated conversation or Q&A at the end of this. Event. We're going to do it by having people type into the Q&A box. And we're doing that, and unfortunately, we can't have everybody be able to speak because, yes, some of you may have heard of the phenomenon of Zoom bombing, where intruders have gone into Zoom calls and have made hateful statements. And actually, even before we went live with this, we got 2 individuals who posted some very nasty comments on the Q&A. And it's interesting because the very types of anti-Asian racism that Professor Liang mentioned in his presentation were the very kind of comments we got from these rather racist and nasty individuals. So, but because of Zoom bombing, we will have to do the moderated conversation in the Q&A. So please, you know, put your comments in the Q&A for that portion. But before we get to that, we have a couple of other speakers. First, we're going to hear from Caitlin from the Brookline Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, which is an office that Brookline Asian American Family Network works often with, and we work very closely on town events with Caitlin and her office. And then next, we're going to hear from our state representative, Tommy Vitola, who's going to talk about, share thoughts on helping the Asian American community. So first, Caitlin.
Great. Hi, thank you, Chi-Chi. My name is Caitlin Starr. I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. And we really wanted to remind the community that the office can receive discrimination complaints either online or by phone. The online discrimination complaint is located at the town website on our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations tab, as well as other information about the process and the Mass Office of Discrimination. You can also call us by phone, my phone number, and I will put the link and all of our phone numbers in the chat so people can at least read it. Does that work, I think? So I can do that so everybody has the information, but you can contact me at 617-730-2345, or you can contact our Chief Diversity Officer, Lloyd Gelino, at 617-730-2326. We strongly encourage you to report what you witness or experience, especially during this time, so that we can assist, but also keep records of everything that is going on in Brookline with discrimination against the Asian American population during COVID-19. I also want to take the time to share that our community relations specialists can help remotely assist residents with enrolling in health insurance. The Mass Health Connector has announced that uninsured residents can apply and get coverage through a 45-day window through April or until April 25th. So if you or someone you know still needs assistance getting health insurance, please reach out to Sarah Kaplan at skaplan, Kaplan, at brooklinema.gov, or call her at 617-730-2329. Thank you, Chi-Chi.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And now we're going to hear from State Representative Tommy Vitolo.
Hi, Representative Tommy Vitolo here. I actually want to start with a few more general announcements that I think are especially important. Number one, the census. You got to fill out your census. Super important. It's important for making sure that our community gets federal resources, for making sure that our community is recognized for the diversity that it has. And so I encourage you to fill out your census. I also want to let you know that the town election has been pushed back to June 9th, and town elections are critical for local leadership. I encourage anyone who is not registered to vote but eligible to go ahead and register. There's still time, and you make sure that you vote on June 9th. Everyone is eligible to vote absentee. 100% of the population is eligible to vote absentee, so you can vote by mail. I encourage you to do that. The next thing I'm going to do is put this right up on the screen. This is my phone number and my email address, 617-872-8921. That's my cell phone, tommy.vitolo@mahouse.gov is my email address. If you want to reach out to my office for help related to an act of discrimination or anything else, we have resources to help you and can connect you to resources. That could be housing discrimination, that could be workplace discrimination. If you feel like you need some help, you feel free to call my office and we will immediately do everything we can to help take care of you the best way we can using the resources at our disposal. I think that the professor is absolutely right. It's so important to talk about this, to ask safe questions with people with whom you're comfortable, to communicate clearly with people that you're closest with, to help understand what's okay and what's over the line or what's uncomfortable. And not everyone understands the power of each and every word to different cultures. And so do feel free to talk about that with people with whom you're comfortable. And the last thing I want to do quickly, I'm going to change my background because I think it's the easiest way I can show you a picture. This is the work of my friend Moses, who I've known for a long time and lives in Connecticut. And he's been working on the I Am Not a Virus campaign for the last several weeks. And I encourage you to share ideas like this with social media tools, with teleconference tools. Let's be really clear about this. It's so important. Once again, please feel free to call me or to send me an email if there's anything that my office can do for you. And thanks so much for tuning in today.
Thank you so much, State Representative Vitolo. Really appreciate those comments and really appreciate showing your friends great graphic work too. Thank you. So we're going to move now to the moderated conversation portion of this. I actually have something that's submitted by someone the Asian Outreach Unit of Greater Boston Legal Services, their director asked me to share some information with the group here. In addition to the Brookline Community Fund's safety net fund, there's also a separate fund for those folks who would like to help out Asian Americans who've been affected economically, especially those without status. There's a separate fund for the Asian Community Emergency Relief Fund that's being put together by the Greater Boston Legal Services Asian Outreach Unit, the Asian American Resource Workshop, the Chinese Progressive Association, the Asian Community Development Corporation, and Viet Aid. They're taking contributions. The need is great, especially among those Asian Americans who don't have status. A lot of them work in hospitality, food industry, healthcare, home care, the very industries that are being hit hardest. And some of them are experiencing language barriers, trying to apply for unemployment. So actually, if any folks have Asian language skills that they can help out with, they're asking for volunteers, and then they're asking for monetary contributions to help those who aren't eligible for unemployment because of their lack of status. So it looks like we do have some questions and comments. That's great. Let's see. I think the first one's probably something that Professor Liang could respond to, and that's what is the problem with the president's use, or what is the problem with the use of the Chinese virus like the president has used it?
Well, the problem with that is that the WHO, the World Health Organization, in fact, inform people we should stop doing that. We should stop having indication of geographically where they came from, because it puts more blame and hate onto those particular geographically associated with the virus than it helps with the cure itself. And in fact, the president has backed off on the usage of that when he actually saw the rise of hate crime happening to the Asian American community. And so the week after, he came forward and said, the Asian Americans are good people. We should treasure their civil rights. And so this is not just with respect to Asian Americans. We saw the same thing. You guys may remember initially what the AIDS epidemic was called. Anybody remember? It was pertaining directly to the gay community, or people were saying, hey, people from Haiti, they brought AIDS over here. Okay, those are all the things that we're trying to disassociate when we're talking about viruses. So it's not about geographical identification. It is about what happens, the byproduct. If and when we do the geographical identification, it creates more hate, it creates more violence, and it does not do anything to help with the cure.
Okay, great, thank you. Next, we have a couple of questions asking how to help Asian American children deal with this. So we have an attendee who's asking, what are some ways for teachers and community members to encourage and affirm AAPI kids, especially very young children who might be exposed to discriminatory or hateful behavior? And then we have a similar question, what advice do you have to help school-age children deal with racist comments?
So this is in fact why I mentioned that we should probably have a discussion with members of the school committee and make sure that the anti-bullying curriculum that we have actually incorporates this type of hate incident, because we're seeing it across the country where children of Asian descent are now being picked upon. COVID, you're the virus, you brought it in. So we know that hate starts early. And in fact, most of the time, hate starts within one's household. And so this is the importance of why we need public education, to make sure that we actually counter, the hate that wherever the kids are having it, getting it, right? We make sure that there's proper education to counter that type of racism and hate.
That's great, thank you. And actually to let folks know, we within BaFin have spent some time working with the school system or talking to the school system to try to incorporate, to incorporate into the bullying curriculum specific training to help Asian American kids to deal with bullying based on race or immigration or language ability. And it's something we'd still very much would like to see the school system do. In the past, there have been events, unfortunately, that were scheduled but that didn't go forward, to try to do some sort of professional development with the teachers within the Brookline school systems on specific needs of the Asian American community. We hope to do that in the future. Chris?
I also add, so part of it is what Professor Liang has just done, which is education. And in BaFin, we have advocated to keep our Asian American history class at the high school, for example. And it's taken not just by Asian American students, but it was also taken by other students. And a lot of it is this education through your curriculum and having an understanding and awareness and a place and a space where they learn this history over the course of a semester and get strategies on advocacy and education. And then the other part going on with what Chichi says, aside from working on bullying and the curriculum and meeting with our superintendent, it's looking at advocating for Asian American AAPI teachers, but not just as language teachers as well, but also for them to have them as guidance counselors and other classroom teachers, you know, so that students can see themselves and others and also have a place to go to. But then I guess sort of more right now in this space, just because I'm a mother too, is to also, you know, be aware, because everyone's on electronics right now, to just kind of, I like to try to keep my kids in the same space as me when they're on electronics so that I can get an idea of what they're seeing, just to ensure that there's none of this Zoom bombing or any of these things that happen, because you just don't know what they could encounter. And then finally also to just, I don't know, because I also teach and I understand that everyone is just, there's so much going on, but because I think there was this question about how educators and others is maybe to make an effort to just check in with children and families individually. And I know some teachers are doing that, just, you know, seeing like, is there a time you have to meet, or do you want to talk on the phone with families and their children, if that's possible. And I understand teachers have a lot going on too with themselves in their homes, and then also, you know, working. But I think sometimes a bit of outreach might be helpful to let families know that they're not on their own.
Great, thank you, Chris. So now we have a question from Scott, who says that he's active in the local chapter of the American Jewish Committee and is looking to partner with AAPI organizations to voice our support for anti-hate messaging. There are parallels with how the Jewish community gets scapegoated for virus events throughout history and also today. We want to help. What can we do to help, and with whom can we partner? That's a wonderful offer and observation. Really appreciate that. You know, historically, the Jewish and Asian communities have supported each other in the past. And in fact, a few weeks ago, before we had to start social distancing, the organization JALSA held an event at one of the local Asian restaurants to provide support and to make their statement of support. That's really wonderful. And we'd be happy, as the Brookline Asian American Family Network, to connect and talk about ways to support each other, because yes, I've heard that there's been hate also directed toward the Jewish communities as well as the LGBTQ communities, which go figure. It's
yeah, let me just add on that particular point. You know, so if one has been monitoring any of the organized hate groups, one of the sources that the hate groups are blaming are actually Jews for COVID-19. Okay, where that connection comes from, where that rationale comes from, who knows? It's exactly what I mentioned earlier about, you know, with hate, there is no, you know, rational analysis and connection. So yes, you know, we definitely need to continue to work together.
great, thank you. The next comment comes from Shulan, who's on our BaFin steering committee. Hello. How can we increase representation of Asian Americans in news coverage, ads, photos? I watch CNN now mostly because I see Sanjay Gupta and Dr. Wen. We need to see more Asian Americans depicted in situations where we are contributing to the solution. That's a great comment and a great issue, and I agree absolutely. You know, I think I read a statistic that a large portion of the doctors that are treating COVID-19 patients are, you know, Asian in ancestry, and it is important to show that, you know, we are part of this group of heroes that is taking care of these patients, and so we definitely want more representation in all sectors. So thank you for that. The next question comes from from Deborah, and she asks, what can white people of Brookline specifically do to reduce threats? What is the town doing affirmatively to reduce such issues? And she's especially concerned about housing discrimination. So I don't know who wants to take that, whether Raul or Andrew.
Well, go ahead, Andrew, please. Well, I was going to say, I certainly can't speak for the white people of Brookline. Perhaps someone else would like to do that. In terms of talking about what the town is doing affirmatively to reduce such issues, I think a few things. I think it's really important, the work that was talked about earlier that Professor Leong, that Chris talked about with the schools. I think that's really essential and important. We need to double down on those efforts. The select board issuing the statement, hosting this virtual town hall with Brookline's Asian American Family Network, I think is an important first step. But also, I noticed in there's a concern about housing discrimination. Through our Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, we do have a subcommittee focused on fair housing. And if there are certain concerns, I mean, that's a great place to bring those concerns. And of course, Caitlin earlier from the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations mentioned some of the efforts that are happening there. So that would be my answer to those parts of the question.
And if Caitlin, you wanted to say anything in response as well?
Hi. I think that doing outreach and education is what we, with the office specifically, has been trying to do right now. I've actually already gotten 2 discrimination complaints since I posted our information. So I'm hoping that working through those, we can be able to collect information and really reach out to the community more, having this is the first that we've received since this has started. And we know it's been going on, but we haven't been getting any reports of it to our office. So I think now that they're going to start coming in, that we can really start doing some more work around it.
Great.
This is Heather. I'd like to say a few words about, I guess, what you can do as a member of the white community. Often racism isn't allowed to really be out in the open. It's usually in close-knit circles. So you usually hear it from a trusted friend that thinks that you think just like them. And when that happens, you need to call it out. You don't have to do it, in an unfriendly way, but they need to know that it's not appropriate and that not everybody shares their opinion. The other thing that white people can do is educate themselves and try to educate others, that their experience is not everyone else's experience.
Thank you so much, Heather. And for those who might be joining us who aren't familiar, Heather Hamilton's another member of the Brookline Select Board. I just wanted to acknowledge that we also have here Nancy Heller and Bernard Green, and they too are also members of the Brookline Select Board, and all of whom voted for that statement earlier that Raul read to us. So I have one more comment here from Adele, who wanted to add that there are Asian nurses on the front lines of the COVID-19 response. And absolutely, I agree. I apologize for leaving out the nurses. Obviously, the nurses are the ones who are bearing a large part of the brunt of the work in trying to save lives. And there are a lot of Asian American nurses as well. And they are a vital part of the healthcare community. Thank you for pointing that out. I think we have, we have one more comment. So Joan Landcourt, who's the chair of the Commission on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, has posted a comment. She wants to let people know that there are several open seats on the commission, and she'd like to talk to leaders of the Asian community about joining the commission. And you can get in touch with her through the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. And so thank you very much, Joan, for letting us know and for posting that information. That's great to know. And I also wanted to thank you guys, because I know your commission voted on asking the select board to make the statement in its support. And we very much appreciate that support and allyship. So thank you. Oh, and Deborah wanted to also include, in addition to the nurses, physician's assistants. So thank you for that. I think at this point we've nearly reached the 1 hour mark. And I wanted to close this out by thanking all the folks that have made this possible. So first of all, the biggest thanks should go to Raul Fernandez, because not only did Raul speak on this, but he ran tech support on this, and he's been doing this for a lot of the calls that the town of Brookline has been holding on these virtual Zoom, and he is a pro at it. So very much appreciation for that. Raul. Of course, thanks to Professor Leong for his wonderful and insightful presentation. This is all being recorded, so it can be shared later for anybody who wants to use it. Thank you to Caitlin Starr, State Representative Vitolo, for your remarks. And thanks to Chris Daniel-Selkett from the BaFin Steering Committee for her welcome and opening. And thanks, of course, to the Brookline Interactive Group for broadcasting and live streaming this. The Brookline Interactive Group has done such great work in this time and age of broadcasting all these different events. So a big shout out to them as well. And to the select board for their statements. Am I missing someone, Chris? You always.
Sorry, can I just add, I would feel bad. I put it in the little chat box. Next week is National Public Health Week. National Public Health Week. And the API, the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus of the American Public Health Association, will hold a webinar that's free and open to the public. The details are in the chat box on April 6th. And it's going to go through the history of COVID, how we came here, and more policy implications, and how do we address this as well. And then to go to Shulan's point, 2 of the speakers are noted Asian American scientists in the area as well. So that might be something extra as well if you wanted to kick off National Public Health Week.
Great, thank you for that information. So I guess all of that information plus what folks have been posting in for different resources is in the chat box, so go check that out. I guess you can download it too if you hit the 3 little buttons in the corner. And again, thank you all for wonderful presentations, remarks. Stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy.
And thank you, Chi-Chi Wu.
Thank you all for a great conversation. See you again soon.